Here. My name is Paul, and I'm here with my brilliant colleague Ioana. We're both from DIA, and we'd love to give you a quick rundown on what we've been working on the past weeks. Kicking off here, sharing my screen. Topic is about DeFi primitives enabled for NFTs. So without further ado, I'm going to kick this off and hand over to Ioana. So stick with me to get the interesting part with her. So NFTs, not only by today, but in general, they differ by their definition. All of them in different ways. Some are very similar, some are not. The smallest common denominator is their non-fungibility. The uniqueness of a token creates fundamentally different use cases and potentially many more than we so far have seen with fungible tokens. With NFTs, we will possibly have the promises of 2017 blockchain can do anything, at least partially delivered and transcending from mostly financial use cases. And primitives that shape the majority of applications we all probably worked over the past years and months. While fungibility, at least for now, are prerequisites for AMMs, efficient large-scale lending, so the precondition for liquidity, it's in stark contrast to something rare. Probably for obvious reasons. We see the majority of use cases for NFTs for the time being initiated by creators, pushing the boundaries for what tokens have been used for. Look at the graphic. Art, collectibles, gaming, music, metaverse, specific assets dominate the use cases. They provide to different audiences a clear value. So like so often, innovation, you could say, is driven by creativity. Financial return was the driver, broadening the scope well beyond what the cypherpunks or more general people who are enthusiastic about the societal implications of decentralization and sound money, resulting in the DeFi space actually growing at such a rapid pace. With NFTs, we see scarcity as a driver for adoption. But what I'm really excited about is the next wave of use cases we expect to see. It goes well beyond ensuring scarcity into not an only perceived scarcity, which might in some game and metaverse application already today have a fundamental element, but in a utility where an NFT defines various forms of usage rights. While use cases, these new types, they're really exciting. We have today, though, still clear limitations for broader adoption. Can be UX, transaction, or usage costs in general, environmental impact. All these are somehow addressed by different initiatives. At least it's beginning to. But we would like to focus on an area we're working on at DIA to provide really the tooling to expand well beyond today's applications. NFTs and the ecosystem they rely on are extremely heterogeneous. There are different L1s, different L2s, scaling solution, marketplaces, NFT categories, storage of metadata, really the disparity of data, the uniqueness of each token, but also the different categories make it hard to use a Lego block-like architecture we're familiar with in DeFi. This is not only limiting the ability to quickly deploy new products and create interconnectivity, it also lacks the ability to create growth fueled by financial instruments, which would ensure faster growth of the existing markets, but also limiting the application for new use cases. NFTs are less of a truly decentralized instrument compared to their fungible peers, to be honest. NFTs rely heavily today on off-chain databases to store the vast metadata they contain. This might change over time as decentralized storage becomes efficient, and the norm. The disparity will remain, though, likely even increase. I mean, similar to what we see in DeFi, NFTs are not only present on Ethereum mainnet, but on different L1s and L2s, sometimes also within one category. Gateways to interact, whether that's buying, selling, or the usage of the NFT within a game may change the nature of the NFT itself. The majority of the data that provides information on relevant interactions are not stored on-chain, but within disparate ecosystems of marketplaces, metaverses, games, and the proprietary databases that use a custom logic on attributes. Most obvious and defying is, I believe, that NFTs are and increasingly will differ in their nature and the information they provide based on their nature and interactions. Digital artifact has little to do with patent IP rights or deed. As NFTs and their respective ecosystems are self-sufficient, there has been little effort made in creating structure in the seemingly purposefully unstructured world of NFTs. We believe that we have the necessary infrastructure and understanding of disparate data sources and delivery of such data when it is needed, as it needs a transparent and efficient structure. When we set the foundation for DIA in 27, what we have built with a large community of contributors derived from an actual need, like an essential building block to a product, infrastructure that provides reliable financial data on an application. And again, today, we can provide this foundation for a new wave of applications and products. While DeFi requires predominantly asset price data, NFT-enabled applications go well beyond that. The vast possibilities of usage beyond financial instruments, this really requires information from non-standardized data. So, I mean, what does a Z-run horse originate from, right? I mean, or what serial number does the I don't know, LeBron Top Shot NFT have, or where did the Hashmask highest offer get in, and who's the current holder? Or when does the ENS domain I just bought expires, or what's the highest transaction the last 24 hours of an Gotchi, which is now settled on Polygon. So I mean, I could go on like for hours. I mean, all these requirements, all these requests, they differ in format, information, and it all derives from different sources and requires structure. So the definition of a category, for example, or marketplace, in order to have a machine-based execution. So at DIA, we're aggregating data from different off-chain and on-chain data sources, covering different L1s and L2s. So we're sanitizing that data with transparent methodologies that can be verified by anyone, ensuring the highest fidelity of that data. We execute the computation of such data in confidential computing environments, which are really resource efficient and verifiable. That's quite important, and we can ensure the provision of the data we're computing there for different individual use cases. For DeFi applications, we go well beyond the aggregation of data from various sources at a single trade level, aggregating and distributing this data, for example, an ETH-USD pair, or also executing really complex methodologies for synthetic assets. But our ability to aggregate these disparate data sources and to ensure its integrity, it's kind of a core competence we leverage for fetching NFT-specific data from on-chain resources such as Ethereum, Matic, BSC, Flow, as well as marketplaces, including OpenSea, Rarible. I mean, there's a bunch out there. And we ensure the data integrity of cross-analyzing off-chain data among the sources as well as on-chain data. And the ability to provide NFT data as a foundation for new business models and builders to execute their vision in a faster and more secure manner goes beyond our ability to handle data in an automated way. NFTs, I'd say already today, they differ and are non-standardized. And we at DIA have been relying, when adding new data sources, heavily on a very active community of contributors who write scrapers, provide input on methodologies, or are looking for ways to improve our infrastructure. And this belief to build a product with a community in a decentralized way is not a tool to offset workload from the core team or anything, but the logical continuation of a DAO that not only enables governance, but also product input from our community. And exactly this community is now more than ever valuable to us, actually, to provide input on the NFT ecosystems. We can leverage the crowd to structure the continuously growing NFT ecosystem, proposing meta categories, specific attributes, to just name a few very relevant data points. We're actually migrating into a progress where the proposals will be automatically executed with a certain voting and staking provided. And we believe that DIA hereby provides already today a unique way for builders to access NFT-specific datasets that will enable the faster and safer deployment of marketplaces, decentralized funds, some content hubs, but completely new business cases that will require harmonized data. So we see with the harmonization not only the possibility for automating currently manual processes, but when it comes to transferring value in the NFT space, but also the ability to really create DeFi primitives. I mean, that's kind of the title here, but DeFi primitives for NFTs that will help the overall market development in order to create capital efficiency for NFTs, which can now be considered as their capital, to be fair. We need information that enables the collateral assessment of an asset that is much harder being non-fungible. I mean, what Ethereum in Compound, I believe, has a collateral ratio of 75%. I don't know, maybe somebody here in the crowd knows better, due to its relative high volatility compared to stablecoin, but high liquidity. An NFT would not be able to cater to such a use case because due to its uniqueness, it's hard to assess its value. With the ability, though, to understand its category and the value across the category and value defining factors, as well as overall liquidity as an NFT, can become a source of collateral. Ensuring valuable NFTs or hedging against volatility of an NFT asset category, again, requires various value defining information that is hosted in all these multiple sources I was referring to. And it needs to be aggregated and cross-checked. So this is what we're doing. The ability, though, to leverage DeFi primitives in such a way will influence, I believe, the entire NFT category and its growth speed. Similarly, lending and staking did in DeFi. So I think it's a core driver. When we look beyond today's predominant use cases of NFTs, we believe that the ability to make new forms of NFTs and their relevant information accessible relies on the availability of infrastructure such as ours. And yeah, I believe that we at DIA are looking at NFTs not only from a data aggregation and delivery data perspective, but also as a tool to make our product usable in a compliant way. We'll be increasing the level of decentralization and simultaneously increasing token holder value by doing so. Having shared now a couple of our views on NFTs and how we can provide infrastructure to this fast-growing space. I'd like to hand over now to my brilliant colleague Ioana, who will share a bit on our vision on the currently disregarded regulatory and compliance perspective of NFTs and the innovation aspect. We're also looking at DR Labs. So handing over to you.
Great. Thank you, Paul. Let me see if you can see everything that I'm sharing. Great. So great first part of the presentation. And for those of you who don't know, Paul is the mastermind behind many of our projects and products at DIA. Now, I'm going to touch an angle that people in the NFT space and people in crypto in general don't necessarily like to talk about, which is regulation. But before I do that, and please bear with me because I have multiple screens, so I might not always look directly at the camera. Let's go back to one of the first points that Paul mentioned, how the non-fungible aspect is the minimum but also core common denominator of NFTs, and equally how sophisticated and varied the NFTs format can become based on that common and core characteristics. So in its most simple form, a non-fungible token is a digital asset on a blockchain with unique identification codes and metadata that distinguish it from other assets. As a result, NFTs are not mutually interchangeable. But it can also represent a new token standard and a new way to transmit a file on the blockchain, or trivially, a digital item with some appealing features from the physical world attached to it. Many variations on this basic definition. However, if you expand this basic definition, we've discovered the emergence of some very sophisticated trends. So, do NFTs represent a way to add a monetization layer and novel game mechanics to creative media? Are NFTs alongside social tokens the next phase in Web3 development built primarily around user-controlled governed objects? A means to recreate digital mimesis, a social environment that the internet and digitization rendered obsolete. Have NFTs facilitated the creation of a native social and cultural layer of the internet where the first mover advantage is represented by buying the initial trend generators, i.e. crypto status? Arguably, NFTs represent permutations of all of the above. In that case, what will the output be? And with these various angles, what potential legal and regulatory implications will arise as this ecosystem develops? The reality is that based on various attributes of an NFT or an NFT class, as Paul was referencing earlier, regulatory implications will vary in scope and level of importance. But why should we care about regulation, right? This is a novel ecosystem, ultra sophisticated, peer-to-peer. Well, but also we should care about regulation primarily because for now, this off-chain component related to NFTs is likely to result in complex regulatory behaviors and intervention. Many in the NFT space operate on the premise that the non-fungible nature of the NFT guards it from any regulatory permeation and oversight. However, there are a few issues with that. Mimicking a real-world asset or real-world process, most of them under some form of regulatory intervention, has by default a number of implications, even in a blockchain environment, and even with the unique digital representation nature of such an asset. In addition, NFTs can become fungible in a variety of situations, in-game fungibility, for instance, but more importantly, when NFTs are fractionalized, in which case they are potentially touched by either primary or secondary market commercial regulation. So what are the most notorious regulatory angles that have been associated with NFTs? Well, IP, copyright, Nexus, AML, KYC, securities laws, a primary and secondary financial market regulation, and I could name a few more. But I want to focus on two very important aspects. So one of them is, do royalty claims in perpetuity represent an investment contract, and do fractionalized NFTs represent a security, at least under US law? First of all, why are these two angles relevant for the ecosystem? The automated generation of resale profit for creators represents a very attractive proposition, and rightly so. As for fractionalization, it is extremely relevant for the liquidity proposition, for the liquidity angle in DeFi applications, and also as a facilitator for price discovery. By the way, um, DI is a solution for price aggregation via very platform. We could trace these fractionalized tokens, or we could trace where these fractionalized tokens are being traded. So let's go back to the regulatory suppositions and questions. So on fractionalization, it was made pretty clear by the SEC that selling fractions of individual NFTs may be considered an investment product, and securities definitions are pretty broad. The royalty claims aspect is a bit more complex in the sense that if based on a raw interpretation of the Howey test, which defines a security as investment of money into a common enterprise with a reasonable expectation of profit to be derived from the efforts of others, the result is that a royalty contract is not an investment contract. However, as the ecosystem develops, a new royalty monetization mechanism potentially arise, with adjacent schemes being created around them, then yes, this too becomes an investment scheme. So to summarize, uh, fractionalized uh, NFTs are very likely a security, and royalties distribution could be considered an investment scheme depending on implementation complexity and market dynamics in the future. And these are just a few nuances that have been identified now at the incipient stage. So we can expect a plethora with the maturation of the ecosystem. Now, it is also important to understand when and why regulators start paying attention. Well, it depends. In some cases, regulatory attention is captured simply by rapidly evolving market health. In other cases, sector-specific laws in the process of being negotiated, where it is almost organic to expand the scope and include the most recent innovations correlated to that space. Um, Massive exposure retail investors, especially when it comes to a nascent system without a consolidated infrastructure or mitigation tools in place, it represents one of the strongest impetus for regulators to intervene. Given the incipient nature of the NFT ecosystem, there are many NFT-related infrastructure angles that still need validation and improvement, and a couple of pain points that have already been identified, especially around lack of standards on metadata, proof of authenticity validation, under standardized provenance tracking, imperfect royalty distribution and circumvention, metadata storage, etc. But out of all the aforementioned, the most dangerous regulatory scenario is the one where a law is the negotiation process, and you can simply insert the modulations of an ecosystem in development. There's one particular jurisdiction that needs special attention in the regulatory context, and that is the European Union and the subsequent proposal markets and crypto assets regulation, which intends to uniformly regulate crypto assets that cannot be integrated into financial instruments regulation. The rationale there is to create a bespoke and mandatory regime for crypto assets under MiCA, but also regulatory competitive advantage on a global scale for the EU. Now, MiCA establishes a set of uniform principles, including transparency, disclosure, authorization, supervision, and prevention of market abuse based on novel definitions and classification of crypto assets. To capture the entire realm of crypto assets, the definition is purposely designed in a generic format as a digital representation of value or rights, which may be transferred and stored electronically using DLT or similar technology. That actuates in the fact that any asset put on blockchain could potentially fall within MiCA regulatory requirements, regardless of its nature or economic function. At this stage of the negotiation, most NFTs are likely to fall within the definition, and consequently, both issuers of NFTs and service providers around NFTs will be subject to the markets and crypto assets regulation. What this means in practice is a series of burdensome, comprehensive regulatory requirements for issuers, including licensing and operating requirements. In addition, the list of regulated crypto asset services also mirror financial regulation on custody, operating a trading platform, exchange for fiat, and providing crypto asset advice. So to summarize, we have on the horizon a potentially fully fledged regulatory and compliance um, map and system of laws that are being designed and pushed out of the EU. Now, aside from painting a very gloomy picture infrastructure around regulation. How is this relevant in a DIA context? Well, our vision of the future is represented by a hybrid format emerging from a level of curated convergence between DeFi and the traditional finance ecosystem, evidently powered by core transparent data infrastructure. And the truth is, many DeFi peers share that out. But for that vision to become a reality, an additional, more consolidated wave of institutional money inflow is needed. And that is very much contingent on clear regulatory parameters and the eradication of regulatory gray areas. With that sort of prerequisite in mind, we at DIA have consciously embarked on an active regulatory engagement path. Similar to how structured data sets and harmonization represent a precondition for market development around NFT or other crypto-enabled applications, the same principle is valid when interacting with regulators who need access to valid and transparent data for a structured and granular understanding of new markets and marketplaces. As outlined in the first part of the presentation by Paul, DIA has a unique capability to cater for and structure data in a fashion which we believe will support the creation and implementation of regulation in a pertinent way. We've understood that our ability to aggregate disparate data sources and ensure verifiable integrity is a core competence we can leverage multidimensionally in DeFi, in traditional finance, and most recently in regulatory engagement. Current laws can only be adjusted too much uh, or to some extent, as there are limitations when you apply laws designed for people to open source protocols. So to prevent an erroneous approach around regulation and to enable the proportionate implementation of a new form of regulation when it emerges, regulatory access to structured and clean data sets are essential. And this is where we come in and have positioned ourselves as partners in discussion, especially with policymakers and regulators in Europe. It is also the rationale behind creating an angle within DIA Labs dedicated to regulatory interaction, via which we have launched a massive education campaign on crypto and DeFi in Europe. I will quickly run through our labs infrastructure, which, as you can see, is a bit typical, but with some interangle correlation. So the first dimension is very much about regulation and education, which I already touched on. The women in emerging tech promotion angle is something I'm personally very attached to. And here I would just say that the idea is to eliminate all artificial structures surrounding advancement of female talent and focus on raw talent and promotion by our network. And lastly, the ecosystem development segment, which is my favorite one. Currently, a couple of projects in development with extra details to emerge in the near future, so I can't really share that much here. But we are focusing on green crypto and a metric layer we're developing around that. And no, I didn't include that as a result of the tweet we all know about. It's in development for a while, and we're working with the Global Blockchain Business Council on this. Um, uh, in addition to that, we're also looking at a project around gaming, sports, and Oracle provision for dynamic NFTs, and some initial testing around digital fashion. Now, as DIA does more projects in the NFT ecosystem, mostly curating a DeFi NFT convergence model, it is obvious that some core infrastructure issues still exist. If the idealized standard is exclusive on-chain metadata storage for NFTs, then we're very far from that milestone. But as already mentioned, the NFT ecosystem is still largely in its incipient phase of development. And many of the pain points are a result of a premature explosion in interest surrounding NFTs. A majority of the infrastructure-related issues that have been identified couldn't be fixed progressively because of the massive takeoff and unpredicted NFT demand. But as the NFT space moves to its next development phase and towards an intertwined status with DeFi protocols, these issues need to be addressed. Quite a few of them, but the most pressing seem to be the unstructured off-chain data storage, lack of standardization around metadata, lack of standardization on royalty distribution, provenance and authenticity vetting, and enforceability of smart contracts, especially in preparation for inclusive on-chain resonance of data. We believe DI's NFT initiatives could represent some major blocks in resolving these pain points. So if you want to work with us on what Paul mentioned, on what I've mentioned now, and just to add to this, that we're going to kick off the labs very soon, please do get in touch. This is our info, and that's all on my side.